Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the ETOA webinar on climate action, turning plans into practice. My name is Tim Fairhurst. I'm joined by some fabulous panelists. We'll just give it a minute or so to let all the participants join us, and I'll say a little more. So thank you for joining us. If you hold tight for a while, we'll start shortly. Thank you. Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon again, everybody. My name is Tim Fairhurst from ETOA. Welcome to this climate action webinar. We have quite a good number of participants, so we'd like to get going since there's plenty to cover. This is recorded, so if anyone wants to take notes, you of course can, but you can get the link later, and we'll send that together with any attachments and links that people want to share. If I could draw your attention to the chat function, if you wish to send any short comments or questions to me or the panel, please do use that. And you can generally choose to make your comment visible to hosts and panelists or everyone. You can just toggle the choices on your right. Short interventions are welcome, so I've got a better chance of reading them as we go along. This webinar is part of a series of work that ETOA is doing as a signatory and supporting member of the Glasgow Declaration. We also signed the Tourism Declares Declaration in late 2020. I'm very pleased to say that Jeremy Smith is here, who will be able to tell us a little bit more about the progress on those various initiatives. The purpose of this webinar is to make it clear to all stakeholders, be they the supply chain, tour operators, destinations, or anyone that's interested in making a change, that it is possible to make a start from wherever you are now. Whether or not you've made a declaration, whether or not you have made a climate action plan, there is plenty of information out there to help you that is free and accessible. There are plenty of experts of all shapes and sizes who can help you in understanding what your options are. And in fact, there are also lots of funded programs, and we're joined today by Laura on behalf of SUSTOUR, who's going to tell us about a particular EU funded project which supports the transition to sustainable practice in all aspects. This webinar is focusing on climate, but it's quite possible we may find ourselves straying into other aspects of sustainability as the discussion continues. The other two panelists are going to top and tail today's discussion. To begin with, I'll be inviting Shannon from TreadRight, the Travel Corporation Sustainability Foundation, to explain what she gets up to in her role as the Chief Sustainability Officer. And Patrick Richards, who's been helping ETOA from his consultancy Terra Verde develop its climate action plan and keeping us abreast of all the things that I'd love to read, but don't usually have time to do. So welcome to all of you. The way this webinar will work is that I'll invite some opening remarks, first from Shannon, then from Jeremy, and they'll be enlarging a little bit on their current activity, which sort of explains from the perspective of a large private sector organization, which owns a lot of assets as well as runs a lot of tour programs around the world. Jeremy giving us an institutional perspective with his connections with UNWTO and evaluating various tools that are out there to help companies navigate their carbon transition plans, but also his experience setting up Tourism Declares, trying to build communities and tell stories about how climate action can be put into practice. Laura, as I said before, is going to be telling us specifically about SUSTOUR, an EU-funded program. Patrick will be listening in, and I'll invite him to begin with just to reflect on what he's heard, and given his experience in the travel industry, reflect in particular on where the opportunities might be for tour operators and for destinations in the supply chain, and where people can make a start. So with no further ado, and with a reminder to use the chat function as you wish, Shannon, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us from the other side of the Atlantic this morning, your time. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your current role and what you see as the big issues, and what would you most like to have out there to make your life a bit easier in managing down the travel corporation's carbon footprint? Over to you, Shannon.
Sure, great, thanks. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to join, Tim. So I'll dive in. We have a lot to cover at the Travel Corporation, so interject and stop if I carry on for too long. In 2020, the Travel Corporation, under my team's direction, I suppose, launched our sustainability strategy, How We Tread Right. That outlines 11 SMART, so they're measurable strategic sustainability goals, one of which is to achieve climate neutrality, another is to achieve a use of renewable energy by 50% across the group, and another is to reduce food waste. So they're primarily our climate related targets. Now that has of course evolved since 2020. We've trumped carbon neutrality with a commitment to net zero through working with Jeremy and through Tourism Declares Climate Emergency and the Glasgow Declaration. So we are currently in the process of, well, we have finalized internally our carbon reduction targets. They are Science-Based Targets Initiative aligned, and we have submitted them to the Science-Based Targets Initiative for validation. All that to say that as the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Travel Corporation, which was your original question, forgive me, we work with the Travel Corporation's 40 travel brands, numerous assets to integrate and measure sustainability across the group. And sustainability for us under our current strategy is to address climate, is to address food experiences, diversity, DEI, I should say, and animal welfare, in addition to resource use through sustainable procurement, reducing single-use plastics. So it's a massive remit. In addition to that, I oversee our Tread Right Foundation. So that's our philanthropic arm, and it's sort of twofold. We have our sustainability strategy. This is how we get our house in order and work with our supply chain. Then we have the Tread Right Foundation on the philanthropic side. That's the way in which we can fund local destination projects to support us to achieve our end goal. Is that clear as mud?
That's all clear so far. So, you know, Shannon, just before we get on to the others, if I can invite you, it's a large organization, and obviously lots of small businesses don't have in-house expertise. But one of the great things about having you on this call is, in some ways, the problems are the same for small organizations and big. And, you know, the organization you represent owns hotels, owns river cruise boats. You know, there are assets whose performance you can manage down. But in our preliminary discussion, you were talking about how hard it is to get numbers for what is happening in destination. And have you got any preliminary thoughts about just what would be useful for you as you try and roll up the numbers organizationally in terms of measuring the supply chain? Where are the challenges, and where do you see any quick wins or opportunities?
I think perhaps that's sort of two questions rolled in one, or 2 points I can address. So there's the more accurate measurement of our supply chain. What we have done, I mean, our supply chain is our trips. That's our scope 3. That's over 75% of our total carbon footprint. And that's trips run by Trafalgar, Kentucky, Uniworld, all of the commercial brands that are far more well known than, of course, the Travel Corporation. So in measuring our trip carbon footprint, we built a custom tool. That's our trip carbon footprint calculator, so cleverly named. And that relies on largely averages. So carbon emission factors that are produced through DEFRA and other organizations, that we had to build a rather sophisticated tool on top of that our product and operations team complete on behalf of every single itinerary, of which there's about 1,500. So it's no small task for us. So, you know, we have relatively accurate numbers on carbon. I say relatively because based on averages is always going to offer some challenges. Yet it does provide us direction, and it does allow us to appreciate what are the low-hanging fruit that we can use to draw down our carbon that we're currently engaged in. Longer stays, fewer internal flights. It allows us to select hotel groups that we know have lower emission efforts that they are employing, et cetera, et cetera. More vegan trips, more vegetarian trips. So, you know, we have that relatively in hand. Oh, am I not close? Can you hear me better now? You're going to see a lot of me though. So,
that sounds fine, Shannon. Thank you.
I saw the message pop up. The other challenge that we have with our supply chain is actually drawing down our supply chain. And that is really where ground handlers, you know, inbound operators, F&B, hotels, that's where we're starting to look for operators that are and suppliers that are paying attention to this, that are already engaged in this, because of course, we don't own those businesses. We can only ask, but we're very reliant on them for reducing our scope 3 emissions. And we are not alone in that, and there's going to be a lot of other buyers coming to the table with that ask coming forward.
I think that's a great point to just close your initial remarks, Shannon. You know, the idea that this is going to become commonplace, that buyers are looking for suppliers who can give them numbers. And this isn't just a sort of nice, it's going to become necessary in the short to medium term. So there's definitely commercial competitive opportunity in making sure this is something people can provide. And the balance is going to be, how do you come up with credible numbers without adding unnecessary complexity? And with that thought, I'm going to invite Jeremy to give us a bit of an update what he's been doing in his interactions, both with Tourism Declares, where he's been active from the start, and also now with the Travel Foundation in helping to build capacity, and also with institutions including UNWTO and assessing what's out there, really with a view to making sure that we're not creating a whole complicated ecosystem of competing measurement systems, and as far as possible, we're aligning on how carbon gets measured in tourism. So, Jeremy, thank you for joining us. Please let us know what you've been up to and any reflections on what Shannon has just said. Over to you.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, it's probably best to take a quick, I mean, as many people may not have any context of Tourism Declares or the Glasgow Declaration. So without wanting to spend too much time talking in the past, I think it does provide the context for where we are now, which was that, so in 2020, the beginning of 2020, we launched Tourism Declares a climate emergency, very much to do that, to bring tourism into the acknowledgement that this is a climate emergency, to bring us together, to publicly, to transparently commit to action, and to ensure that that action was grounded in science and the needs of the climate. Throughout Tourism Declare's existence, it has received no external funding, and I only say that not because I'm out with a begging bowl, but because it makes the context that, not that I'd say no, but that as we got more and more successful, and there's now 450 something organizations that made that declaration through Tourism Declares, ranging in scale from individual consultants to national tourism organizations and companies such as the Travel Corporation, delivering on the commitments of Tourism Declares around ensuring the rigor of monitoring, and the climate action plans weren't just pieces of gesturing and sort of virtue signaling, but actually were going to translate into meaningful measurement and action, is going to be unmanageable. At the same time, being a volunteer-led, unfunded organization meant that we did a good job at connecting to the converted, and probably needed more to be able to reach across the entire ecosystem of tourism and into the bigger organizations. working together with the UNWTO, the United Nations Environment Programme, the Travel Foundation, and Visit Scotland, the first national tourism organisation to join Tourism Declares, to create the Glasgow Declaration, ready for COP26 last November. That starts as a declaration, a moment in time in Glasgow last November, but it was a declaration to kickstart a decade of action. You know, the full title is the Glasgow Declaration for a Decade of Climate Action in Tourism, this key decade of now through to 2030. And what we've seen is that so those two challenges that Tourism Declares has, the framework for both Glasgow and Tourism Declares is the same framework. This is not about creating many initiatives, as you sort of highlighted in your question. This is about bringing together under one umbrella. We now have, with publicly, over 500 companies and organizations and destinations have signed the Glasgow Declaration in its first few months, many more in the wings, because the levels of due diligence that now are put through to ensure who are coming on board makes things much slower. So it will very rapidly be over 600. We see in the last week or two that Expedia, Booking.com, and Condé Nast have all signed the Glasgow Declaration. So you have the biggest, sort of media brand, let's say, connecting, or one of the big media brands connecting into tourism, and the two largest by market cap corporate entities. And we talk about the importance of the supply chain that Shannon was talking about and you were talking about, and that looking for who they're, working with the right partners. Well, when the likes of Booking and Expedia start supporting and recognizing what they can do, well, there's so much that they can do in terms of their own companies and their own data centers, but what's really interesting is what they can do to bring on board their own the suppliers who connect to the world of tourism through those platforms. And there are many, it's not for me to say what these companies will do, but the potential of what they can do is enormous. And we see what they're doing, and through the work happening with Travelist and the likes. Expedia has just joined Travelist as well. So you've got Expedia, Booking, TripAdvisor, Google, Skyscanner, Trip.com, working together to avoid that fragmentation and to standardize reporting frameworks, standardize measurements, ways of the consumer being able to say that if they look on, if a consumer looks on Google or looks on Skyscanner and sees which one of the two and which flight is more sustainable, they're reading the same score. They're not reading something on Google that's different to something on Travelist and getting a conflicting message. It needs to be and it needs to be the same if they look at a hotel on Booking or a hotel somewhere else. So the focus for us, stepping away from that, if that's one side of it, is to ensure that having got organizations of all shapes and sizes to make the commitment to publish their climate action, to deliver on climate action planning, how do we enable that? And this is what my focus realistically in 2022 has all been about. And we're working a lot on projects in Scotland, one with Shannon and the Travel Corporation, and two others, looking at how we can support destinations and businesses around creating their climate action plans, and support them in order to learn what the challenges are, to then be able to scale up the advice, the tools, the resources, the processes, to support at scale. Because again, it's great to say we've got 500 plus people signing the Glasgow Declaration, but it's a drop in the ocean in the scale of what we actually need to do when it comes to getting sector-wide change. And the challenge is that, if there's one learning from trying to work out how to help everyone do climate action planning, is it's different for everyone, and everything has to be grounded in place. And we have to move away from thinking a one-size-fits-all approach will be developed, and understand how different it is if you are working in a low-lying Pacific Island nation to working with an outbound tour operator from the Netherlands. How, therefore, can we find something that has the commonality necessary to allow us to benchmark and to share best practice and to measure progress, without building something that is so across the board that it doesn't actually deal and work with the specifics of different contexts?
I think, Jeremy, you've anticipated very neatly some of the things that Laura is going to be discussing. And much of that is to do with helping people navigate what at first sight can seem quite complex. But as you suggest, there's a lot of effort being made to drive towards comparability in the various methods people have of measurement. That's going to help consumers. It's also going to help business. And it's always very much a B2B organization, and we're trying to help businesses who are generally buying from businesses to get the numbers they need and provide the numbers that they're being asked for in a way that's taking a proportionate amount of management time and not something that just seems just too intimidating and too complicated. And just to pick up one of the things you said, if it's 500-600 organizations, albeit some very big global names, as well as individual consultancies who have signed either one of the declarations, there's a commitment within 12 months to publish a climate action plan. So it's already going from several hundred to some proportion of that who've published a plan. And then there's the people who've figured out how to operationalize a plan. So in practice, what are they going to be doing week to week? What are their in-house procedures in order that as they get to the end of their first year of having a published plan, they can give the numbers in a way that's going to allow apples comparison over time and demonstrate they're making the reductions they've targeted. So, if you were to guess, or this is a very leading question, but would you say that one of the biggest challenges is, okay, we get it, we have to declare, we need to make a plan, and you can look at other people's plans and see the language they use and what makes sense for us as an organization. But is the big challenge the turning that into practice? So we all get it, we all need to do something, and if we don't do it, the regulator is certainly going to come into the space and constrain the amount of room for maneuver. But is putting it into practice, from your discussions, is that the big obstacle? Or is it just thinking it's an important thing in the first place?
I think because this for most is going to be the first plan, this first round of planning, because as you said, the idea is to repeat the process every 12 months. Your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh plan by nature are both retrospective and forward-looking, whereas these plans are only sort of a plan for a plan. So I think there's going to be, your question is going to be answered very well as we see what happens subsequent to the first year. But I think putting in place, the right environments, the enabling environment for that, for plans to turn into action, just as for declarations to turn into plans, to turn into action, so that pledges become, things that actually happen, is the essential thing to do right now. And it's like when we have made decisions early on this year, when we said, well, what do we do after COP26, was that it wasn't just about trying to grow the numbers of people who'd signed the thing, because you could focus all your energy on outreach and you'd be left with lots and lots of people signing something and no one having a clue what to do next. And actually the most important thing was to work with those who'd taken that relatively brave step, because they were doing it with the minimum amount of supporting resources or other plans to go and have a look at, or guidance, or those who'd gone before, and saying, right, what do you need to be able to develop those first climate action, to be able to deliver on those first climate action plans? What are the challenges? And that is, and a lot of that is around measurement. At the same time, I think measurement is both essential and can end up being a hindrance, that if we end up refining measurement for so long that by 2026 we've nailed measurement and not done anything else, then what the measurement will tell us is we've waited too long to get on with anything. And actually what we should be doing is saying, if you've got a hotel, get yourself onto renewable energy as fast as possible. Don't worry too much about measuring it. I mean, obviously you should be measuring it, but it shouldn't be a hindrance. It's not the first thing you do before doing everything else. So yeah, we do need to ensure that we can supply people with the tools to deliver it. Time will tell.
Well, thank you. And very conveniently, that is a very good segue for Laura, who's going to tell us about the Sustail program, which is funded by the EU Agency for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, SUSTOUR. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for the invitation and for being here, having the opportunity to present this project. So yeah, as you said, it's funded by the SUSTOUR project is funded by the EU COSME program. So it is focused on small and medium-sized tour operators and travel agents. And it offers them a support program for a year. So starting in June, actually, until June next year, we have quite an intensive support program to, on the one hand, help companies improve their entire sustainability so they can go for a certification, for a travel life certification. There are 2 levels depending on what they, on the level of commitment, and either the full certification or the first Travel Life Partner Award. But then most interestingly in this context, I think, is some of the accelerator programs that we have set up. So for those companies that don't want to go for the full spectrum of sustainability for now, but want to focus on the carbon management or also on the plastic management, for example, we set up a number of accelerator programs that are going to focus on specifically this. And the carbon, and we're working, the project is supported by quite a large number of European travel associations and national travel associations, as well as ETOA. And together we're working on this, on setting up and creating this carbon management program, and it will include and will start with the assessment of the travel packages. So the companies, tour operators specifically, but also, of course, agents, have the opportunity to use the Karmacal tool, which is a tool integrated into the Travel Life platform that allows you to calculate the CO2 emissions of entire travel packages. So it looks at transport, at flights, accommodations, all connected to quite a large, to the actual database of, for example, aircrafts. So looking at specific numbers there, and accommodations as well as activities. So it's possible to to look into the entire packages, and that will be the first step that the companies do, because of course, before managing anything, you have to assess and analyze. And it will be led by, the program will be led by a carbon expert that is going to set up a training program as well. So to get some background knowledge on carbon management and what actions can be taken, as well as we're putting together some criteria specifically looking at carbon management within the company, within the travel packages, and having the companies, assess themselves and measure themselves against some of the Travel Life criteria, but not the entire set. And together with this support and with this coaching by a carbon expert, this really sets you up for a start. So it's a good opportunity to use this project and to apply for it. It's free for all ETOA members. The application is kept pretty simple. You just have to make a few clicks, give us a few information that you are eligible as a small and medium-sized enterprise. You have to give us some information on what you've been doing for sustainability so far, and answer some questions for this carbon management program. For example, answer some questions about have you offered carbon offset before? Have you included, or are you interested in including carbon offset pricing within the price of the travel package? So these are some of the questions, but they have kept very basic, so no big information needed there. It will take you a couple of minutes, but and you have one more week to apply for it. So the deadline is the 10th of May. And of course, we invite you to all use this opportunity and to join that project to get started on this and to actually get the support as well. You will have exchange opportunities with the other companies that are joining this project. So it will also follow this peer-to-peer learning approach and learning together how to manage the carbon. That's as a basis.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lara. And maybe we could put the link in the chat for the more information online. And just a quick point of clarification, I think I'm right in saying that only EU established businesses can qualify for the direct funding from the Sustail programme, but certainly ETOA members generally are going to have access to materials that's going that will arise from the climate focus module, if you like. So the coaching and that sort of really guided support that Lara was describing is you have to be an EU established business to qualify for that, as it's EU funded.
And some additional countries. So UK, Iceland, for example, also.
UK is definitely in.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
I thought it was EFTA only, but that's if the UK is in, that's definitely wider than we originally thought. So that's very welcome. Thank you, Patrick. Well, I notice you taking lots of notes. No surprise. You've obviously been inside the travel industry for a while before you put away such childish things and got into consultancy, helping the travel industry get engaged with the transition to net zero. From listening to Shannon, representing a very large organization, you talk to organizations large and small, as well as other experts in the field. I'm going to ask the same question I put to Jeremy. Do you think the big issue is people thinking that this is important in the first place, or is the big issue how to do something practical about it, or are you going to go for both?
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you for the invitation. And it's great to be on the panel with some real trailblazers in the space with my fellow panelists. So thank you to all of you. I'm not going to cop out and say both, but I'm going to sort of say both. I think there's being a transition. Fundamentally, we started Terra Verde because we felt that all of the talk was at a very high level, and that even though sustainability and carbon reduction was going to become one of the most important things impacting the tourism industry, that there really wasn't practical assistance to help people onto the ladder. So that's where, even through the lens of the pandemic, we decided that this was something that was really important. My concern at that stage was, firstly, that people felt overwhelmed, and even, Jeremy referenced Expedia. There's a very interesting survey out from Expedia this week. They've surveyed 11,000 people. 70% of their consumers said that they wanted to make sustainable choices. So that was a significant rise. But also 70% of the consumers said they felt overwhelmed by getting started. So I think that getting started piece is incredibly important in creating the awareness. Having said that, I really do feel for a lot of travel businesses. They've just transitioned from a phase where they were trying to worry about meeting the next salary bill. Probably now, with business picking up, they can meet the next salary bill, but they're thinking, oh my God, I'm trying to handle the business that I want to be able to handle, but with 50% of the staff that I had pre-pandemic. Rushed off my feet is not a word for it. So that transition and that work that they've got to do still doesn't predicate for having a lot of time to be able to work on a sustainability or a decarbonisation program. So I think it's probably shifting, Tim, from the awareness more to the practicalities, but certainly we are here to help with those practicalities in building a sustainable decarbonisation program. But just to pick up a little bit on what my fellow panelists have said, I do think that this is transitioning from being something that people think is a nice to do to being, as we talk about quite a lot, Tim, a top 3 problem. And it's a top 3 problem because if you don't do it, you're not future-proofing your business against what's coming down the track. And what we have seen is, when this was purely, let's say, a CSR thing, frankly, you could kind of get away with platitudes. You could say, well, I've got some nice programs, I've got this, I've got that. Now it's being moved into the sphere of carbon accounting. And that started off with, let's say, some of the blue chip corporates, or it cascaded down from COP to the blue chip corporates, but then started permeating every different area of travel. And Shannon said 75% of her footprint is her scope 3 supply chain. With most travel companies, it's probably even a bit more. I suspect your river cruise boats, Shannon, probably push that down a little bit. But so for most companies, it's imperative that they address that. Not only are they measuring their own carbon, but it's imperative that they address and measure their scope 3. And that probably means you know, as Shannon said, it's my tour operators, it's my DMCs, it's my coach companies, it's my restaurants, it's my hotels. So if you're not able to give that information, it's really going to be tough to be able to meet the demands of your customers. And that's permeating every different vertical of travel. You know, from business travel, you're finding people like CWT, Amex, HRS are all now displaying carbon emissions. Through to the events, you know, if you're an event company, you will have to basically say to the client who's giving a showcase for their event, yeah, I can make this a green event. To the big leisure players, like be they booking.com on the OTA side or on the more traditional tour operator side, exactly incorporated into the travel corporation, encapsulated in the travel corporation. So really, this is becoming a must that you'll be able to need to respond to these to these trends, Tim.
So we've now gone through a good gamut of opinions, and two things have struck me about this. One is, and you've all mentioned it, but I think Jeremy put it well, don't overcomplicate. The scope to get very, very granular and almost get over precise is going to be the enemy of making progress. But one of the big areas of opportunity there is comparability. And I'm curious, you know, just as before we get into broader discussion, I'm curious to know whether the panel think that that's an area where the regulator needs to have more teeth, in order that people aren't just throwing numbers out and saying, you know, this is how we're measuring it, that there's a more prescriptive methodology that's endorsed by the regulator, even if the regulator doesn't approve it, in order that consumers can be confident they're making fair comparisons. And the very simplistic comparison I make is the stickers on white goods like dishwashers and washing machines that evaluate their energy efficiency. There is some sort of comparable methodology that manufacturers must use in order to grade those machines. And, you know, that's reasonably straightforward. Obviously, a washing machine is a much simpler thing than a multi-day tour involving lots of different suppliers with all kinds of different permutations. But just curious to know whether this is something the public sector needs to be doing. All that said, we know that the private sector needs to just get on with it, because regulation tends to take a while to get put in place. And even if the European Commission identifies good practice, it needs programs like SUSTOUR in order to roll out and develop that capacity. So it's what's the role of the public sector, I'm curious about. But the other is very much commercial, and it's something that Shannon raised right at the beginning. When you're considering the product, you know, do you have fewer internal flights or get rid of them altogether? Do you change the meal plan in order that there's more vegetarian food or vegan food, because that has verifiably lower carbon impact? And, you know, there is this question of how does, you know, the market try and lead the consumer or respond to the consumer? And I'm curious to know whether we think this is a question of the private sector almost taking a moral position as well as a competitive one to say, this is what we should be doing. We should maybe travel less often, but stay for longer. Just slow it down. You know, are there some sort of prescriptive things about how we should be designing travel product, which will reduce the harmful impact, and actually increase the positive impact in terms of local spend and the ratio of visit time versus travel time and all those sorts of things. So thinking about product development generally, I'm curious to know whether we think it's a question of the private sector leading the consumer, or is it the private sector responding to the consumer, as well as Patrick said, something that you're just going to have to do sooner or later because you're going to be required to. So Shannon, would you like to reflect on either of those? The sort of public sector, is that going to have to play a role in ensuring comparability, so we're all sort of comparing apples, or do you want to reflect a little bit on the product development piece and how you see that evolving over the next 2 to 3 years?
Okay, two big questions there. So I'll go in order. I think that Jeremy nailed it when he said earlier that you just need to start. And I think that's been true of the way in which we've seen sustainability evolve to regenerative. I don't really care what you call it, to be honest, but the way we've seen this evolution of this conversation over years, it's always been tour operators saying, great, I want to get involved, but where do I start? You just need to start. And what's interesting when you look at the sort of the vertical, and a lot of them are SMEs. In my country, it's at 80% small to medium-sized enterprises. Resources are limited. So do you need to worry about the complex environment that I have built on reporting, or do you just need to be able to tell me you have eliminated single-use plastics? Because you are going to have a lot of tour operators and buyers that come to you with just a simple checklist, and that checklist is fine. That is not to be diminished. Because other organizations have resources to build complex reporting systems. So I think that the comparability is important, but it is less important, in my opinion and from my perspective, than just getting on with it and being able to see proof points of the things that I need. You'll agree to my animal welfare policy. You'll take out any, and I'm going to talk about the broad spectrum there. You will offer vegetarian. You do address food waste. These are the proof points that are part of the early stages, I think, of just getting on with it, if you will. I hope that answers where I sit on.
It does, but I was going to ask just on the verifiability front, because you've committed to science-based targets, and that's a rigorous standard you're committed to. So to what extent, totally getting that some suppliers are just going to give you a fairly sort of simple read because they're small, they don't have very complicated ways of measuring things. But what's your comfort level in terms of it being sufficiently verifiable? This is a real thing that's happened, rather than, well, they could put anything in an email. How do I know? What's the due diligence?
Yeah.
Where does sort of proportionality sit there?
Entirely. And I think that's a sliding scale. And I think that's also going to go through a process of evolution. I am in a position where my product and operations teams get a lot of face time with our suppliers. So they're going to see it. Moreover, if they don't see it, the guest is going to see it. And the guest is going to come to us first with complaints. Rest assured, they will complain. If I've told you, you can fill your water bottle up at places XYZ where the water's clean and there's no plastic involved, and they see it, they're going to love to come to me to tell me, and so they will. And so I don't want my supply chain to get, or my suppliers to get caught up on, forgive the our suppliers to get caught up on too much of the nitty-gritty on verification. I mean, if you go down the travel life route, then you've got built-in verification, and I know that as a buyer, right? And the same is true with many other certification schemes, not all. I trust, again, my buyers and my product teams, they're out there, they're experienced it, they're checking, they're vetting. So it's tough to get it through, really. Because a lot of the early things in this process of evolution that some buyers are going to look for are going to be front of house, because the guest sees front of house, and that's often where you will begin. Single-use plastic is front of house. You can't hide that, really. I don't know if that addresses it. And then because I, again, agree with Mr. Smith that we just need to get on with it, there is going to be a little bit of honor system. But you're also going to see something interesting, in my opinion, going forward.
the element of collaboration amongst tour operators such as the Travel Corporation on the matter of sustainability is growing exponentially. Reason being, because it's a shared challenge. We are deeply aware that we are all going to the supply chain and asking a great number of things. And we're aware that we need to reduce that burden and try and go to the supply chain, not en masse, we're not at that stage, but at least with some, consistency of what we're asking, possibly even a consistent approach, because as a group of hoteliers, we have to go through the bookings and the Googles and the TripAdvisors and all of their questionnaires. So I get the burden of reporting, and we would like not to add to that, to the supply chain, because that'll just, I think, reduce action, and that's not the goal. So again, there's a bit of a bit of a groupthink starting to slowly happen from the various buyers towards the supply chain. I mean, maybe I'm optimistic.
Maybe I could just sort of pause there, because Christina, our colleague from ETOA, has put in a question saying, just understanding all of that, is there a danger of greenwashing if there's no common methodology and data? And I think what I'm hearing from you is that, it's not a binary proposition. It's not either very strict or very casual. It's, we're all heading in the right direction, but don't let the best be the enemy of the good in this case. But Jeremy, would you like to reflect a little bit on that dilemma? So, greenwashing is obviously bad news, and it's going to undermine the credibility of a lot of well-intentioned and well-executed effort if there is some greenwashing going on and people are coming up with spurious, whatever certificates that don't really mean much, or making claims that really cannot be verified. Where do you see that? Do you see that as a tension, or just this is a period we're going to have to go through, and the project is really going to be to draw attention and tell stories about the good stuff, so that's what, in the spirit of collaboration that Shannon's just talked about, that is what will prevail, because that's what works, and that's what's going to get widespread adopted.
Again, like Shannon, I thought, saying big question. Greenwashing's been around for as long as green's been around, really, and there's going to be people using and abusing the opportunity to present a positive image of themselves forever. I mean, I'm afraid that's inevitable. And there are tools and methods and processes and organizations and dedicated individuals out there doing what they can in different ways, shapes and forms to address the scourge of greenwashing, and different things will apply in different ways. And as fast as we have fixed it, someone will come up with a new way of getting it to look like it's, all new, all shiny, which is, depressing. But I mean, that's the truth of communications. I'm afraid we find better ways and new ways of telling stories, and we get around things. I do think we need, yes, I see what Christina was saying, that good standardized methodologies will have a role to play, but they aren't the be all and end all, because measurement isn't neutral. The methodology is designed by someone. It'll be more likely to support one and not support the other. And maybe a process will be fantastic if you have the capacity and the sustainability department to be able to go through all those things, and that will enable you to get the badge. But those dedicated small organization might not be able to go about putting the time and the energy into doing it, because its work is all in the field. So it doesn't get the badge, and the lack of badge penalizes if the badge is the only way of doing something. Yes, good storytelling. I mean, I've stood up enough times at conferences and said we just need to tell better stories, but that just puts the opportunity into the hands of those who can tell better stories. And stories don't necessarily based in truth, they're based in good constructions of narrative, and so it gives us a perfectly good opportunity for people to dissemble there. Likewise, I see people saying, ask your hotelier what they're doing with their such and such. And it's like, who on earth goes on holiday and asks if they can get shown around the grey water recycling system? I've done it, but I'm a pretty marginal sort of person. And I just think we do put this enormous amount of pressure on the tourist. And I too often go back to when the consumer demands it, we will change, which isn't exactly looking at being a sort of, market leading sort of situation if we're waiting for the market to lead us there. And that Expedia survey that I agree, was good to see, but I mean, I do worry at these sort of intention to action gap between supposedly 76% of consumers saying that they want to travel more sustainably and, well, it not necessarily happening. So I mean, all in all, it's like, I suppose what I'm saying, which is maybe the least helpful thing I can say, but it's honest, is there's no simple answer to how we address greenwashing, and we just need to keep on addressing it with all the tools available to us, depending on the context and the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the honest truth of it. And I think back to Shannon's point about collaboration, sharing, here's something that works, have a go, use it. There's certainly been a lot more sharing of in-house competence and time and expertise on this topic more than anything else I've certainly seen in ETOA's role as a trade association. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'd like to get back to the practical action. Patrick, you talk to businesses, you offer them advice as to, depending on where they are. But one of the things you also do is, having been through the opportunities for reduction, you also talk about mitigation, and the market for carbon offsetting itself is quite controversial because it's not the answer, and people suggest it's a way of greenwashing in a way. Hey, we carbon offset, therefore we're fine. So there's risks in that area. But how do you help people navigate what can be quite a complicated market? And there may be lots of reasons to do nothing because people can't really assess what the options are. So can we talk a little bit about mitigation?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to, Tim. But first, if you don't mind, I'm just going to pick up on one of your earlier questions, which I don't think got covered by my colleagues.
That's the product piece.
Which is just about, is the consumer looking to business or is business following the consumer? And I very much believe that I kind of agree with Tim's skepticism, with Jeremy's skepticism around some of the surveys, but ultimately, I believe that the consumer is looking for business to provide the solutions. And increasingly, if a hotel can say, well, actually, I am only 10 kilos of carbon per night, and I'm 103 euros on booking.com, whereas another hotel is 40 euros a night, but is 101, then consumers will say, you know what, for 2 euros a night, I'll go for the one that's only 10 rather than 40. So I think their business providing easy solutions for consumers is really important. So that's just to cover off that one. On the point of mitigation, offsetting has a part to play, and there are some really, really good examples of offsetting. But I think tread carefully is also the byword. If you only offset and don't reduce, then that is not a credible plan. What we actually have to do to be able to go towards the 1.5 degree increase, which is, ingrained in COP and all of the IPCC protocols, we have to be able to reduce our carbon. What you cannot reduce, you can then offset. But trying to offset without actually addressing your carbon consumption and reducing, that is not a credible plan. So beware of that. A second thing to beware of is whether your plan will actually, whether your offset will actually do what it says it does. Look for a certified plan wherever you possibly can, certified on things like the gold standard or VCS or certain other of the registering points. Now, they 73% of offsets, and this is a figure, this can be challenged, but 73% of offsets do not do what they say they do. So, be careful with offsetting. It can really trip you up. And finally, I suppose the other thing with greenwashing, and I would agree with Shannon's point, I think it's going to be a slow process, but the more that it's transparent, it's difficult in the long term to get away with not being totally transparent and not being totally truthful with what you're looking to achieve. The consumers will find out, your suppliers will find out. There will be increasing standards, and I don't necessarily think those standards will be laid down by the public sector. I think they'll filter down from the protocols that are already in place, SBTI and other areas, and they'll be imposed and checked by the customers who are asking you to stand by them.
Well, thank you, and I think that's useful words of caution there. We've only got a few minutes left, and I just want to open one topic which we may end up pausing till a future occasion like this, and that's the perspective of the destinations themselves. Who, if you take Paris, where we were last week for various meetings, there is a very, very strong green agenda on the part of the mayor for the city itself, but also for the broader region. And they have their carbon measuring tool, which they're promoting among the supply chain. And there's no question that trying to make the city greener in its transport and how people use it is a big strategic priority. And declaration of organizational self-interest. ETOA represents buyers who are bringing business to Europe from countries all around the world, and this is something that's going to continue as a commercial activity, subject to whatever regulatory environment or industry initiatives take place in order to manage down that carbon footprint. So really, to me, the question is, from a destinations perspective, should the cost of acquiring a visitor, should the fact that someone comes from further away be something you take into account, or is it better to just leave this in the hands of the consumer and the operator? We're the ones who are choosing to go on that flight. It's up to me to manage down my impact, and it's up to the company to figure out how to manage down the supply chain impact as well, because the destination itself doesn't really have the capacity to monitor all the individuals that are in its jurisdiction. So does anyone sort of feel that there's a dialogue to be had between destinations and private sector in regard of managing down the footprint? Is that a productive line to pursue? Destinations have their own agenda in this area, but is there a dialogue which will help with the carbon management tools between destinations and operators? And if I get some blank looks, I'll know that's something that we'll talk about next time. But any thoughts on the destination voice in this?
I have a few thoughts there.
Sure, go ahead.
I think it's a pretty simple. I think airlines need to own airlines. That's their scope one. I think that I need to address my scope one, scope two, scope three. If you look at what is within your purview as an operator, then I must own that. As a business, I must own that. And when I look to destinations, where do I desperately need them? I need them on, a great low carbon place to live is a great low carbon place to visit. I need them on infrastructure, and I need them on supporting their businesses within their supply chain, because I can't affect change or limited change. Let's hope with Visit Scotland, great amount of change because they're so keen on their infrastructure. As it addresses, because it supports communities and it supports the inbound traveler. It's not that simple. And I worry about destinations getting mired in conversation with respect to who's who in the zoo, because again, it's another opportunity to delay impact. And that's concerning to me, frankly. And I don't want to see, the onus alleviated from the airlines to focus on new technology. I don't want to see the onus alleviated on me. And I think that that's an opportunity for operators to skirt the issue if they think the destination might be addressing it. I think it's just, that's a rabbit hole I worry about.
Yeah, and going down rabbit holes can be a speciality in this area. And just to be clear about the financial implications, there's no question that strategic amounts of money are needed to green the transport system and infrastructure generally, and that's certainly part of the EU's Green Deal. We're pretty much out of time, so just sort of 10-20 seconds each, if anyone's got any final reflections, just next step for anyone who's yet to make progress, what's it going to be? And then I'll close. So Jeremy, if it's one thing, what would it be?
I mean, we've said it several times, but I'll say it again, it's just start. I mean, don't go in there working everything out before you start. Start knowing nothing, because then you'll be in a community of people who are trying to do the same thing and will share best practice or ideas or challenges, and just take the first step.
Laura.
I would agree, and I can just highlight that. Don't be afraid to start. Also, just it's the start that is the hardest part, I think, and taking the next steps will come, and there's support out there, SUSTOUR or other things, other support, but just get started.
Patrick.
Sorry to sound the same as everybody else. Make the start. Make mistakes, but be transparent. Go down. There's plenty of collaboration, and there are growing number of tools and help and collaboration out there. So use them.
Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah, absolutely. Just get your own house in order. And I think that if we all do that, then the cumulative impact is considerable. And I would consider, with respect to offsets, though I do support offsets, the appropriate offsets in the appropriate time, you also have to recognize the CapEx that's got to go into your own reductions. And I would encourage that prioritized.
Thank you. That's a very clear steer. Well, I'd like to thank Shannon, Jeremy, Patrick and Laura for their time and insight this morning, this afternoon, but also to all of you for listening. Please do get in touch with us. We will be sending an email to everyone who's registered after this event, so we can share any links and so forth that the panelists wish to send your way. And let's keep the dialogue going. Policy@etoa.org will find us. Thank you very much for listening. See you next time.
Tim, thanks all.